Good afternoon, my dear students. I am Dr. Pratima from Sarojini Devi Eye Hospital, and today I am here to discuss about ocular anesthesia and its complications. So the aims and objectives of this lecture are to know what ocular anesthesia is and why is it required. Before we go into ocular anesthesia proper, we will learn about the relevant anatomy, the pre-operative evaluation of the patient, and the classification of ocular anesthesia, details about each type of anesthesia given, and the complications. So coming to the introduction, what does anesthesia really mean? The word anesthesia is a Greek word. The root is from Greek, and the Greek word anesthetos means without sensation. So the word anesthesia really means without sensation. So anesthesia is given to relieve the patient of the discomfort while we are doing any procedure like surgery. So anesthesia in the eye per se has three components. That is anesthesia to remove the sensation, analgesia to remove the pain, loss of pain, and echinacea, that is loss of movements of the eyeball. So echinacea may or may not be there depending on the type of anesthesia chosen. For example, if we give topical anesthesia, that is if we use a topical anesthetic like proparacaine, echinacea need not be there, but still the patient will not have any discomfort because there is no pain and sensation will not be perceived. So the orbit is shaped like a quadrilateral pyramid. It has a roof, floor, medial wall, and the lateral wall. So this medial wall, both the medial walls are parallel to each other. The medial wall forms an angle of about 45 degrees with the lateral wall, and both the lateral walls form an angle of 90 degrees. So the medial wall is very thin and made up of a bone called lamina papyracea. So since it is very thin, it can be perforated easily during anesthesia also. And the different spaces of the orbit which are important are the subperiosteal space, which is just underneath the bone, and you have the subtenon space, which is just below the Tenon's fascia, which is covering the globe beneath the sclera. So the space beneath the Tenon's fascia is called the subtenon space. And the extraocular muscles, they arise from the annulus of Zinn, as you already know, and these muscles go and insert a little away from the limbus. So the muscles encircle a space which is called the intraconal space, and the space around these muscles is called the extraconal space. So what are the contents in this intraconal space? These are important because when we give retrobulbar anesthesia, so these contents can get damaged because we are entering the cone, intraconal space of the orbit. So the intraconal space has many contents, important ones, that is the optic nerve coming in, the oculomotor nerve, the abducent nerve, the fifth nerve and various branches of the fifth nerve, the ciliary ganglion lying there, the ophthalmic artery and its branches. So these are all the important contents of the intraconal space which can get damaged during retrobulbar anesthesia. So this is a picture showing the origin of the muscles at the annulus of Zinn and the muscles, the different nerves entering the orbit through the superior orbital fissure. So coming to the anterior orbital spaces, these anterior orbital spaces are important because we give the peribulbar and retrobulbar blocks through these spaces. There are 4 in number anteriorly, that is the supranasal, supratemporal, infranasal and inferotemporal spaces. We give the block in the inferotemporal space because it is mostly avascular and it is large also among all these spaces. So we give the retrobulbar and peribulbar blocks through this space. Preoperative evaluation of the patient, a detailed history and systemic examination has to be done. We have to record the patient's blood pressure, random blood sugar, ECG, and a history of antiplatelet use for CAD and CVA has to be taken because the antiplatelets might have to be stopped for 1 week before the surgery, like an orbital surgery or a lacrimal sac surgery, we need not stop the antiplatelet use for only cataract surgery because the bleeding is very minimal for modern day phacoemulsification. A history of drug allergies has to be taken because some patients may have xylocaine sensitivity, and a GA workup has to be done if the patient is requiring a general anesthesia. So ocular anesthesia can be of two types, local and general. In general anesthesia, like in other specialties, we have inhalational and intravenous. In local anesthesia, we have four types, that is infiltration, intracameral, topical, and nerve blocks. In nerve blocks, we have two types, that is facial blocks and others such as supraorbital, infraorbital nerve blocks. In infiltration again, we have four types, that is retrobulbar blocks, peribulbar blocks, subtenon blocks, and subconjunctival blocks. Coming to general anesthesia, it is used in various types of eye surgeries like pediatric surgeries, squint surgeries, in major oculoplastic surgeries, in orbital trauma repair, in diachrostocystosrhinostomy, or in vitreoretinal surgeries. The indications of general anesthesia are pediatric ocular surgery, in mentally retarded and psychiatric patients, in patients with painful arthritis, epilepsy, or frequent coughing, in anxious and apprehensive patients, and it can be a patient's preference also. What are the advantages of general anesthesia? It provides a safe operative environment. There is loss of consciousness and amnesia, the patient forgets about it. Complete akinesia and analgesia can be obtained. There is adequate skeletal muscle relaxation. A controlled IOP can be there, and for bilateral surgery it can be advantageous, and to avoid the complications of local anesthetics. So before giving general anesthesia, the effect of various general anesthetic agents on IOP should be kept in mind because various congenital glaucoma cases and childhood glaucoma cases will be examined under general anesthesia. So when their intraocular pressure is measured under general anesthesia, the effect of various anesthetic agents on the IOP should be kept in mind while recording the intraocular pressure. So various inhaled anesthetics like these volatile agents and nitrous oxide reduce the intraocular pressure. Intravenous agents like barbiturates, benzodiazepines, and opioids reduce the intraocular pressure, whereas ketamine raises the intraocular pressure. This should be kept in mind. And muscle relaxants like depolarizers, that is succinylcholine, raise the intraocular pressure. The non-depolarizing agents either have no effect on IOP or lower the IOP. So coming to local anesthesia, it is used for various ocular surgeries, commonly used type of anesthesia, like for cataract surgery, glaucoma surgeries, in the cornea department for keratoplasty, pterygium excision, for various surgeries like refractive surgery, minor anterior segment procedures like a foreign body removal, and in retina department for vitreoretinal surgeries, and in the plasty department for a dacrocystectomy or a dacrocystorhinostomy or minor extraocular plastic surgeries, and also in the squint department for squint surgeries. So what are the advantages of local anesthesia? The patient is conscious and will maintain mental alertness during the procedure. So the patient will not lose any consciousness, and drugs used in GA can be avoided. There are lower risks of systemic complications like nausea and vomiting during the postoperative recovery period. And this superior postoperative pain control and recovery time is faster, and early mobilization of the patient. And nowadays we are even giving topical anesthesia, so the patient can go home very quickly. So the disadvantages are it is painful, difficult in uncooperative patients, injection complications could be there, and it is not suitable for children or mentally unstable patients. So how do these local anesthetics act? They act by producing a reversible block to the transmission of peripheral nerve impulses. So how do you prepare your patient for local anesthesia? A detailed history and examination has to be done, and optimal health condition should be there for the patient. A friendly rapport should be maintained. An IV cannula should be kept, which is better. In case of any emergency, we can start giving drugs very easily. A lignocaine test dose, that is test for hypersensitivity to lignocaine, should be done. Full cardiopulmonary resuscitation equipment should be available in the hospital, and appropriate monitoring of the patient should be. So the commonly used drugs for local anesthesia are benoxinate, proparacaine, amitocaine, lignocaine, bupivacaine, and ropivacaine. So proparacaine is commonly used as a topical agent. Concentration is 0.5%. Onset of action is in 15 to 30 seconds, and duration of action is 15 to 20 minutes. Lignocaine can be used as topical drug, that is 4% concentration, and for infiltration, that is 0.5 to 1% or 2%. So the onset of action for the topical one is 10 to 35 seconds and the duration of action is 15 to 20 minutes. For the infiltration one, the onset of action is 5 to 10 minutes and the duration of action is 30 to 60 minutes. For bupivacaine, the concentration used is 0.25 to 0.75%. The onset of action is moderate and the duration of action is 75 to 90 minutes. So coming to the uses of topical anesthesia, manipulation of superficial cornea and conjunctiva prior to regional blocks, for diagnostic procedures like apprenation tonometry and gonioscopy, removal of superficial foreign body and suture removal, for intraocular procedures like phacoemulsification in a cooperative patient, for specialized procedures like forced duction test, electroretinography, and corneal epithelial debridement. So what are the advantages of topical anesthesia? It is cost effective, least invasive procedure, compression of the eye is not required, effect of the anesthesia is immediate, there is immediate visual recovery, useful for monocular patients, and you can avoid postoperative ptosis and sight-threatening complications like a globe perforation or optic nerve damage which occur with the blocks. So what are the disadvantages? There is no akinesia, that is loss of movements of the eyeball, and not suitable for extended surgery, and it requires proficient experienced surgeons, well-informed and motivated patient, a cooperative patient, an inability to handle intraoperative complications if they occur, and unsuitability for anxious, deaf, and those having a dense cataract. And adverse effects of the topical anesthetic agents are epithelial and endothelial toxicity, allergy to the drug which presents as a conjunctival hyperemia, chemosis, swelling of the eyelids, lacrimation and itching. They can be tear film instability and reduced reflex tearing, and they can be dry eye also, and superficial keratopathy like diffuse punctate keratitis. So what are the drugs used for regional anesthesia? They are lignocaine 2%, bupivacaine 0.75% along with hyaluronidase 5 to 7.5 international units per ml, and adrenaline 1 in 2 lakhs. Adrenaline causes local vasoconstriction, thereby reducing the rate and extent of systemic absorption of the drug, which causes increased availability of the anesthetic agent locally, causing enhanced uptake and increases the duration of action of the local anesthetic in that area. And it also decreases blood loss during surgery. What does hyaluronidase do? It breaks down the connective tissue, therefore increases the diffusion of the drug in the tissues in that area. A retrobulbar block is injected into the muscle cone to block the ciliary nerve and its ganglion, the third and sixth cranial nerves. It provides akinesia and anesthesia of the globe, and the patient is in supine position and in primary gaze. The site of injection is between the medial 2/3 and the lateral 1/3 of the lower orbital margin. A new site is being suggested for retrobulbar block. The needle should be inserted just above the junction of inferior and lateral orbital wall as laterally as possible with the bevel facing the globe. So the direction of the needle should be backwards, upwards and medially towards the apex of the orbit, and the needle should be 25 gauge, 1.5 inch, that is about 31 mm, disposable blunt tip retrobulbar needle, that is an Atkinson needle, and it advances straight back parallel to the orbital floor, perforating the orbital septum. After the septum is perforated, the equator of the globe has been passed, that is 1 centimeter of needle penetration, and direct the needle supranasally at 30 degrees angle. Advance the needle piercing the intermuscular septum and enter the muscle cone. 2 to 4 ml of local anesthetic is injected in retrobulbar block. Gently move the needle from side to side looking for any movement of the eye as a clue that the globe has been penetrated. Aspirate the syringe to ensure intravascular or intradural entry. After the injection, intermittent firm digital pressure is applied for about 5 minutes to prevent occlusion of the retinal circulation. It produces a hypotony and diffusion of the anesthetic agent. You can also use a super pinky or Hohn ball for about 10 minutes. 4 ml of anesthetic increases IOP by 6.2 mm of mercury. Ocular compression will decrease the IOP by 8.8 after 5 minutes and 14.3 after 40 minutes. Retrobulbar block provides complete akinesia, dilatation of the pupil, adequate and quicker anesthesia, and minimal amount of anesthetic agent is required. Complications of retrobulbar block are central retinal artery occlusion, intravascular anesthetic injection, perforation of the eye with a retrobulbar needle, intraocular anesthetic injection, that is into the eyeball, optic nerve impalement with intrathecal injection or with optic nerve sheath hematoma, brain stem anesthesia and frank convulsions, extraocular muscle palsy when the muscles are injured, decreased visual acuity, trigeminal nerve block, respiratory and cardiovascular depression as part of the oculocardiac reflex. Contraindication is a bleeding disorder. There can be a risk of retrobulbar hemorrhage, extreme myopia, long eyes because there is a risk of globe perforation. An open eye injury may cause expulsion of the intraocular contents and a posterior staphylococcus. In peribulbar block, the anesthetic is injected into the peribulbar space. It spreads to the lid and other spaces. It produces globe and orbicularis akinesia and anesthesia. The position of the patient should be supine and the patient should be in primary gaze. The volume given is approximately 5 to 10 ml. Site of injection. The point between the medial 2/3 and lateral 1/3 of the lower orbital margin adjacent to the infraorbital notch, about 3 ml can be given. Second point is just inframedial to the supraorbital notch or between the medial canthus and the caruncle, about 2 ml can be given. The bevel of the needle should be directed towards the globe and needle advance parallel to the orbital floor, and no redirection is required as in a retrobulbar block. The hub of the needle should not go beyond the inferior orbital rim. So what are the advantages is the anesthetic agents are deposited outside the muscle cone, that is extraconal, and needle is away from the globe, the blood vessels, the optic nerve and the dural sheaths, less pain and less intraoperative posterior pressure, which creates a softer eye during surgery. Disadvantages are it can cause a conjunctival chemosis and there is less akinesia than retrobulbar block. Complications are globe perforation can occur with a peribulbar needle, intraocular anesthetic injection can happen, optic nerve impalement can happen with intrathecal injection or an optic nerve sheath hematoma. There can be respiratory and cardiovascular depression just like the retrobulbar block. So what is a parabulbar or subtenonous block? So as I told you during the spaces, we can inject the anesthetic into the subtenon space. So that is called a subtenon block. So topical anesthetic, that is 0.5% proparacaine is instilled. With a blunt Westcott scissors and a forceps, you will create a conjunctival nick halfway between the inferior limbus and the fornix in the infratemporal quadrant. So after giving the incision and dissecting the Tenon's fascia to open the subtenon space, you will inject the anesthetic with either a 25 gauge blunt tipped cannula or a needle. The cannula is kept straight and parallel to the optic nerve, and you can inject about 2 to 3 ml of local anesthetic in the periequatorial region, which will bathe the muscles and the nerves within the cone with the local anesthetic. So what are the advantages? If you use a cannula as opposed to the needle, there is less chance of penetrating the globe or the vessels or the dural sheath. Compression of the eye is not required. Rapid onset of anesthesia and deeper level compared with the topical. Reduces patient anxiety as anesthesia is administered after the patient is draped. Lack of elevation of blood pressure and transitory cardiac arrhythmia. Requires low volume of anesthetics, better anesthesia to iris and anterior segment. Disadvantages are subconjunctival hemorrhage and more postoperative morbidity. So there are different nerve blocks which can be given, like the frontal nerve block to block the supraorbital and supratrochlear nerve which supply the upper lid during ptosis surgery. The site of insertion is just below the midpoint of the supraorbital margin transcutaneously directed towards the roof of the orbit. About 2 ml of local anesthetic can be given. And local infiltration and lacrimal sac anesthesia is used for surgeries on the lacrimal sac in the NLD, where we anesthetize the near the lower orbital margin and the supraorbital margin, and also near the anterior lacrimal crest. So the facial nerve blocks are given to achieve paralysis of the orbicularis oculi to prevent blepharospasm, which causes rise in IOP by 10 mm of mercury, as an adjunct to retrobulbar blocks. Volume given is 3 to 5 ml. 25 gauge needle is used. 1.5 inch disposable. So coming to the different types of facial blocks, the Van Lint block is given along the supratemporal and infratemporal orbital margins to block the terminal branches of the facial nerve. The O'Brien block is given at the trunk of the facial nerve, anterior to the tragus of the ear, at the neck of the mandible. The Nadbath block is given at the exit of the facial nerve from the stylomastoid foramen before it enters the parotid gland. The Atkinson block is given along the superior branch of the facial nerve at the inferior margin of the zygomatic bone. So coming to the complications, the important complications of retrobulbar and peribulbar blocks, which occur very infrequently, but we have to know about them. So first one is the retrobulbar hemorrhage. The frequency is about 0.074 to 2%, which indicates that it's very uncommonly seen. The signs and symptoms are a rapid intraorbital and intraocular pressure elevation, increasing proptosis, marked pain, ecchymosis in the eyelids, chemosis, and vision is reduced, about poor perception and no perception of light. How do you manage it? First thing is you don't do your surgery, postpone the surgery. Then do an indirect ophthalmoscopy for evidence of central retinal artery compromise to rule out a CRAO. And immediate medical treatment consists of giving intravenous osmotic agents like acetazolamide and mannitol, postponing the surgery as I already told you, and a surgical decompression if the retrobulbar hemorrhage is too severe by doing a xanthotomy and cantholysis or an orbital. So one more important complication which can occur is globe perforation. Penetration can occur with both the blocks, that is retro and peribulbar. The rate of scleral penetration reported by Hamilton et al. Is 1 out of 5,235 injections, that is retrobulbar injections, and not a single perforation out of 6,000 and odd peribulbar injections, which indicates that peribulbar is a safer block when compared to retrobulbar. Davis and Mandel also reported that the rate of globe perforation is about 1 in 16,000 in odd cases, which is about 0.006%. That means it is very, very rare. And high myopes and soft eyeball patients are more prone. High myopes is those who have an axial length more than 26 millimeters. So what are the signs and symptoms? A sudden and marked pain during the delivery of local anesthesia, hypotony with inability to secure a stable globe during the surgery, a reduced red reflex due to a vitreous hemorrhage, loss of vision, serious sight-threatening vitreoretinal complications like a retinal detachment and intraocular hemorrhage. If a penetrating wound is suspected, do not expose the sclera since the needle entry site is very small and self-sealing. Do not meddle with it, and please take the advice of a vitreoretinal surgeon. Optic nerve injury. Direct injury to the optic nerve or the vessels supplying it can occur, resulting in optic atrophy or a hemorrhage, intraocular hemorrhage, due to damage to the retinal artery or vein. So the damage to the optic nerve can occur by ischemic damage from the intrasheath injection of the anesthetic or hemorrhage, pressure from a retrobulbar hemorrhage, pressure from excess local anesthetic injection to retrobulbar space, or excessive applied external pressure. So the position of the globe may influence the rate of injury. So placing the eye in the primary position reduces the danger of the nerve and vessel damage, and avoiding long needles and deep injections into the orbit. So how does the muscle palsy occur? So incidence of post-operative ptosis is between 0 and 20% after cataract surgery. Incidence of diplopia is less than 1%, reported by Davis and Mandel. And diplopia and ptosis are common for 24 to 48 hours post-operatively when large volumes of anesthetic is injected. But if it persists or fails to recover, then it is due to a muscle damage. Then you should suspect a muscle damage. And causes of prolonged postoperative diplopia and ptosis are injecting the anesthetic into the muscle, local anesthetic myotoxicity, ischemic contracture following hemorrhage or trauma, or due to the speculum, a brittle suture, pressure on the globe and the upper lid, or prolonged eyelid patching. A brainstem anesthesia is also an important complication. Due to direct injection of the anesthetic into the optic nerve sheath and subsequent travel along the optic nerve sheath into the CNS via the subdural and subarachnoid space, brainstem anesthesia can occur. The incidence is very, very uncommon, 0.09% to 1.5%. Signs and symptoms are amaurosis, drowsiness, lightheadedness, confusion, loss of verbal contact, loss of consciousness, shivering, and tachycardia. Cranial nerve palsies can be there, convulsions can occur, respiratory depression or respiratory arrest, cardiac arrest can occur. The onset of symptoms is delayed 2 to 40 minutes after local anesthetic injection and lasts for hours. The management is early and prompt treatment, 100% oxygen, maintenance of vital signs, endotracheal intubation and controlled ventilation, and placing the eye in primary position. Coming to the oculocardiac reflex, it's called the trigeminovagal reflex. The trigeminal nerve is the afferent and the vagal nerve is the efferent. Causes of this reflex are due to traction on the extraocular muscles, pressure on the globe, seen during eye muscle surgery, detached retina repair, and during enucleation. The result is a bradycardia, ventricular ectopy, ventricular fibrillation. Factors contributing to the incidence of oculocardiac reflex are preoperative anxiety, hypoxia, hypercarbia, and increased vagal tone owing to age. So you can see the pathway here. It starts due to stretch in the extraocular muscles. From the muscles, the impulses travel along the long and short ciliary nerves, the afferent pathway, and through the ciliary ganglion, they go through the ophthalmic branch of the fifth nerve, and then they travel to the Gesserian ganglion, the trigeminal ganglion in the CNS, and from there the efferent pathway starts through the vagus nerve and comes out through the 10th nerve, vagus nerve, and then goes and supplies the heart, causing the. So the treatment for oculocardiac reflex is you have to stop the surgical stimulus immediately, ensure adequate ventilation, ensure sufficient anesthetic depth, and local injection of lidocaine near the eye muscle, and also atropine can be given or glycopyrrolate can be given, which is often helpful immediately or prior to the surgery. Thank you. If you have any questions or doubts, please type them on the Telegram app, or you can contact me personally on my number through the Telegram, or you can WhatsApp me. I can clear your doubts.